So, okay. The word Tikkun Olam, like I said, one of the core values of the JCED economy this year, is a phrase that is thrown around a lot in Jewish life. And we are going to look kind of where the phrase came from and kind of what the roots are in the concept within Judaism. And then it's going to lead us to talk about kind of what Tikkun Olam means, because it's used very, very broadly, and different people mean different things when they use the phrase. So we're going to jump in, we're going to read these texts, and then we'll discuss them. The first one is really long. Anybody really like to read and want to read a long one? Okay, I will read this one, and then we'll try and get somebody to read the next one. So this is by a text. This is written by Howard Schwartz, who wrote How the Ari, who was a rabbi, a Kabbalistic rabbi in Sfat, created the myth and transformed Judaism. So, for many modern Jews, the term Tikkun Olam, preparing the world, has become a code phrase synonymous with social and environmental action. It is linked to a call for healing the ills of the world. Indeed, Tikkun Olam has become the defining purpose of much of modern. What many of those who use this term do not know is that the idea is rooted in the last great myth infused into Jewish tradition, a cosmological myth.
He expects a civil lawsuit will come in the case against Texas and is hopeful the city.
A cosmological myth created in the 16th century by the Jewish mystic Rabbi Isaac Luria, known as the Ari. So he's from 1534 to 1572. Here, the term myth refers to people's sacred stories about origins, deities, ancestors, and heroes. So that introduction part was written by Jennifer Knapperstein. So but the next part written by Howard Schwartz, and he's going to summarize this concept from Rabbi Luria. The myth of shattering of the vessels. How is it that a concept rooted in medieval Jewish mysticism is so endeared itself to contemporary Jews? In order to understand this unlikely development, let us first consider the myth itself, known as the shattering of the vessels. At the beginning of time, God's presence filled the universe. God decided to bring this world into being, to make room for creation. God first drew in a breath, contracting God's self. So the idea is that before the world was created, God took up all the space, everything was God. So in order to create the world, God had to do tzimtzum, is the Hebrew word, had to become smaller to make room for creation. From that contraction, darkness was created, and God said, "Let there be light." Right? That's the beginning of creation in Genesis. The light that came into being filled the darkness, and 10 holy vessels came forth, each filled with a primordial light. In this way, God sent forth those 10 vessels like a fleet of ships, each carrying its cargo of light. Had they all arrived intact, the world would have been perfect. But the vessels were too fragile to contain such a powerful divine light. They broke open, split asunder, and all the holy sparks were scattered like sand, like seeds, like stars. Those sparks fell everywhere, but more fell on the Holy Land than anywhere else. That is why we were created, to gather the sparks no matter where they are hidden. God created the world so that the descendants of Jacob could raise up the holy sparks. That is why there have been so many exiles, to release the holy sparks from the servitude of captivity. In this way, the Jewish people will sift all the holy sparks from the four corners of the earth. And when enough holy sparks have been gathered, the broken vessels will be restored, and Tikkun Olam, the repair of the world awaited so long, will finally be complete. Therefore, it should be the aim of everyone to raise these sparks from wherever they are imprisoned and to elevate them to holiness by the power of their soul. One of the most remarkable parts of Gittin, which is a section of the Talmud that we're going to look at, was the two middle chapters which discuss the concept of Tikkun Olam, repairing the world. As we say, Tikkun Olam means remedying economic, social, and legal injustices in an attempt to make the world a more livable place. Tikkun Olam is about going beyond the letter of the law. All right. Yes, again. First of all, has anybody ever heard before this interpretation of the sparks that broken vessels? That's what Tikkun Olam is about. Have you guys heard of this before?
Yes, I have.
Okay. Do you have any thoughts about it, Roger?
I'm having so many problems with my Zoom that my mind is sort of on the broken pieces of my.
Yeah, Roger, I think you're having trouble with your connection because I couldn't hear you. So what do you take from this, right? The world was just God. God retracts God's self, doesn't seem to, becomes smaller, makes room to make the world, and then sends out these 10 vessels filled with holy light into the world, but they shatter, and those bits of light of holiness go everywhere. And the idea of Tikkun Olam is for us to find those sparks and to bring that holiness into the world, and that's how we repair the world. Does this make sense to everybody? Do you guys understand? Questions, comments? Can you think, what would be an example of sparks of holiness in the world? Can you think something you've seen in the world that you think would be a spark of holiness?
How about children?
Children is the first one that pops into my head, okay, for sure, right? Anybody who's spent time working with children, and many of us have, can see the holiness in children. They're so innocent and precious and so much more spiritual than the adults around them, right? Because they're, for sure. Part of this idea is that you can take mundane, regular, non-holy things and make them holy by what you do with them, right? So you could think of an object. You could think about the horn of a ram, right? Which is just a horn of a ram by itself. It's not a holy object, but when you blow it as a shofar, you're bringing holiness to it, right? A piece of broccoli by itself is not a holy thing, but when you say a blessing before you eat it, and then you eat it, then that's bringing holiness to it. And also it gives you energy, and then you use that energy to do good in the world. That's also bringing its holiness out. So the idea is that there are these holy sparks, and this gives us an opportunity to make the world a better place. You guys with me so far?
Yes.
Good. So there's a prayer that is very, very famous, and it's the place where we hear the words Tikkun Olam, another version of it. But I want to look at the whole prayer. So there's a prayer called Aleinu that is said at the end of every service, right? At morning, afternoon, evening, it's always included. And this is in the second paragraph, which interestingly in many Reform synagogues is not said. This part of it is often not said in Reform synagogues. And I say that's interesting because Tikkun Olam is such an important focus of Reform synagogues, but they don't say this paragraph that refers to Tikkun Olam, which I think is an interesting thing. Let's read it, and then we can discuss why that might be. Who would like to read me text 2? Abe, you want to read us text 2 in English?
Yeah. Therefore, we put our hope in you, our God, to see the glory of your strength, to remove all idols from the earth, and to completely cut off all false gods, to repair the world, under the kingdom of God, and for all living flesh to call your name, and for all the wicked of the earth to turn to you. May all the world's inhabitants recognize and know to you every knee must bend and every tongue must swear loyalty. Before you, Evian, our God, may all bow down and give honor to your precious name, and may all take upon themselves the yoke of your rule, and may you reign over them soon and forever and always, because all rule is yours alone, and you will rule in honor forever and ever, as it is written in your Torah God will reign forever and ever. It is said, God will be ruler over the whole earth, and on that day, God will be one, and the God's name will be one.
All right, so this prayer, the end of the lane, does anyone want to take a stab at summarizing it? What does it strike you as being about? Thoughts? What are we hoping in this prayer? So if you're looking at it, we're hoping that everybody is going to see the glory of God, right? That we will all be united together, all people in the world, and everybody is going to recognize the glory and the greatness of God. This does not mean that we hope everybody in the world has become a Jew. We don't want everybody to become Jewish, but it's the idea that everybody will recognize that there is one God. There could still be Christians and Muslims and Jews and lots of other religions, but there'll be a recognition that there is one God, and that God, the Jews worship, the Christians worship, the Muslims worship, the Hindus worship, that everybody in the world worships, that's the same God, right? That it'll bring unity. But when we use this prayer in the prayer, this phrase in the prayer book, it doesn't say Tikkun Olam, it says Litakein Olam b'malchut Shaddai, to repair the world under the kingdom of God. Why I think this is particularly interesting is that Tikkun Olam, the idea of repairing the world, is often like very separate from the religious part of Judaism. We want to be good people, we want to repair the world, we want to help the poor and the sick and the stranger and help everybody that needs help. And it's like the concept is divorced from anything related to God. But when we look at it in the text, both here and the one before it, it's very related to God, right? First one is the godly sparks all over the world that we're trying to bring back together about repairing the world. And this one is like trying to unite all people together, recognizing one God. I really would love to, everybody's very quiet today, but I would love to hear people's thoughts about this, because like I said, this is such a core belief in Judaism. We're so focused on Tikkun Olam and repairing the world, but in some ways it is so divorced from where it came from. Kaylee, what do you think?
I'm just wondering about this, it says false gods, what is that?
It means idols, right? People who make a statue and then say this is God, right? Which was the primary form of religion before Judaism came around, right? People made idols and prayed to them. It also referred to like worshiping the sun and the moon and the stars and the, right? The idea that there's not just one God that is united God, as opposed to many gods. Doreen, you got any thoughts?
I'm still trying to figure out what you guys are saying, where we are.
So on page 2, it's the very end of Olam. And I was saying that this is one of the places where the word Tikkun Olam comes from, right? The Takana Ta'olam b'malchut Shaddai. So I was saying that it's interesting to me that when we talk about Tikkun Olam, often in a very cultural Jewish way, right? We want to make the world better. It's kind of divorced from the idea of God, but that God is so present here. That's right.
Okay.
Jen, you have any thoughts about this?
I apologize, just walked away from the camera, so I'm back. I'll comment on the next one.
May I step in?
Please, Roger.
And I'm really sorry for the problems that I'm having. I'm not able to do a video. I can't see any of you and I can't see the text. I apologize. I think the underlying principle is also that we are the world and life is on loan from God, that we repair what belong in a partnership with God, that we can't say, well, this land is mine, body is mine. It is, everything's on loan, and that God has contracted to make that possible. And so the vessels that have been broken, we need to partner with God to repair them.
That's really beautiful, Roger. Thank you. So if I'm hearing what you're saying is that God created the world for us. And that now we have a partnership with God to take care of this world that God's created. And it's not just ours, that we have to take care of it because God has created it for us and for us to be partners. Is that what you were getting at?
Yes, which comes back to your point that Tikkun Olam is very much a religious concept.
It really is. And by the way, for those of you who know the organization Tikkun Ha'ir, that literally means instead of repairing the world, it means repairing the city. So it's like saying, okay, we're gonna repair the whole world, but where do you start? You start locally, which also is a very actually Jewish concept. When Judaism talks about helping others, when it talks about tzedakah and giving, the concept is your first obligation is to your family. You gotta take care of your own family. Next, you need to take care of your Jewish community where you're living. The next, you need to take care of the whole city that you're living in, and then it goes broader, right? State and country. So this idea that we need to start local is a very Jewish concept. But what Roger's saying is that this concept of Tikkun Olam, of repairing the world, is a profoundly religious one, right? We need to repair the world because God created it. There are these godly sparks that we have to find in the world and make it better. All right, so the next text we're gonna look at, because honestly, looking back in Jewish texts, there aren't too many other places where it mentions the phrase Tikkun Olam, but there are all sorts of places where it talks about the things we need to do to make the world a better place. So if you had to guess before we look at them, what kinds of things, and you can put this into the chat if you don't want to, if you can't unmute, what kinds of things do we do to make the world a better place? When you think of the mission of Tikkun Olam, Abe and I were just talking about, we visited MJDS this week, and it's a part of their 3 core values, right, is Tikkun Olam. So we're talking about Tikkun Olam, it's part of the Federation's mission as well. We talk about Tikkun Olam. What are some of the things that you think about that are ways of repairing the world? You can either put them in the chat or you can unmute, or the people in the room can just jump in. What are the things we do to make the world better?
I think we provide food at the Jewish food pantry for those citizens of that neighborhood, and I think that's making the world better.
Okay, so feeding the hungry, right, for sure. Good. What else?
Nice.
What?
Talk nice.
Talking nice, right? There's a concept in Judaism of derech eretz, of just being like respectful and kind in the way we speak to people. Absolutely. Activism, Tabby said, absolutely. Tabby, can you say a little bit more about that? What kinds of activism? Sam says giving charity and educating others. Terrific. Education, like that, for sure. Sam, what kind of education? What kind of education is going to make the world, repair the world and make it better? Oh, Sam, we can't hear you. Maybe put in the chat, Sam, because I can't hear you. Tabby says, I provide free do no harm healthcare to activists and homeless folks. It's my main form of activism. That's wonderful. Terrific. What else? Any other ideas? What we do to repair the world to make it a better place?
Social emotional learning. That's when we're looking at certain parts of education.
So focusing on social emotional learning as a part of education. And how does that help repair the world? I agree with you, but what does that do as these kids get older? What is that going to do to make the world better?
It gives them tools to kind of deal with their own stress, and also it gives them the sense that they are responsible for themselves and people around them.
Sure. Okay, so it helps them deal with their own emotional needs, to be responsible for themselves, to be able to help the world around them. And if we go to the worst place, right, if you think about violence we've seen in the world, right, if we can help teach kids that social emotional regulation as young people, then maybe as they get older, we don't see some of the tragedies that we're seeing, right? Were you gonna say something, Trini? Sorry.
No.
That's beautiful, you said. Any other thoughts, what we do to repair the world, to make the world better?
I think that we find situations, places, individuals that, like the vessels, are also broken. And we strive to help them become shalem, whole, which we know that is so similar to shalom.
Beautiful.
That the wholeness becomes the peace. And that's what we're trying to do, to reassemble the world in God's image.
So when we find that brokenness in other people, and I would add, Roger, to in ourselves, and we work on repairing that, that is bringing fullness and wholeness, which is shalom, which is like shalom to the world and making the world a better place. And I would add to that, in order to see that brokenness, we have to be paying attention. We have to slow down and see the people around us and recognize the things that they are going through. I know for myself, sometimes I get so busy, and I'm running from thing to thing to thing to thing. I'm thinking about everything that needs to get done, but if you want to be able to see that brokenness, you've got to be able to pause and really see people and listen to people in order to respond to it. Sam put in the chat, educating others about the Holocaust shares the dangers of normalizing hate speech. Terrific. Oh, wonderful. Anybody else have anything you want to add before we start reading some more texts?
I think maybe start with ourselves.
Terrific. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, na'ed doresh na'em mekayem. We ask for things, we ask for people to treat us in one way, but we need to also do that ourselves. By example.
Absolutely. Okay, so in order to treat others well, we start by treating ourselves well, which sometimes can be really hard, right? Sometimes we're the last people we take care of, right? And then that prepares us to be able to help others. Put on your own mask first, right? All right, so let's look at a few more texts. So these are examples of repairing the world, but they don't use the phrase repair the world, for the most part. So so text number 3 is from Leviticus. Sorry, do you want to read this one?
Which one?
Number 3?
In English?
Yeah.
And if your brother becomes poor and his means fail, then you should uphold him. As a stranger and a settler, he should live with you.
Okay, so this first one, which is from Leviticus, talks about how you treat the poor or the strangers. We started out by talking about feeding the hungry, right? And all the things poor need, right? Whether it's food or clothing or shelter or healthcare or all of the things that they need. And then text number 4 is a commentary from Rashi, from a rabbi named Rashi, who comments on what this text from Leviticus means. Haley, do you want to read us text 4?
You should uphold him. Do not leave him by himself so that he comes down in the world until he finally falls altogether, when it will be difficult to give him a lift. But uphold him from the very moment of the failure of his deeds. To what made this the differences between whether you assist him at once or whether you wait with your help till he has come down in the world be compared. To an excessive load on the back of a donkey, so long as it is still on the donkey's back, one person is enough to take hold of it and to keep it up as soon as it has fallen to the ground. Not even 5 persons are able to set it on its legs.
I think this is a really interesting text. I had not read this one and I was preparing for this class. So this is talking about when you should start helping a poor person. So according to this text, when do you need to help them?
Before he falls.
Before they fall, right? Not when they hit rock bottom, not when they're in such terrible trouble, but when they start to stumble. Right, and it's giving this example of this donkey, right? If it's a little unbalanced, one person can help it if it's still standing, but the minute it's fallen to the ground, you need so many people to help it. So what would be examples in our world today of how we can help someone before they've fallen that far?
You don't think about recycling.
Terrific, okay? Think about the planet. You know, all of it, right? Greenhouse gases, global warming, you know, not enough water to drink, with recycling, all the things happening to the world. Like if we just wait until we really get to the point where the world is inhabitable, fixing it is going to be much harder than if we can get moving now, which we're already probably late to be doing it, but if we can get moving now before it gets worse. Absolutely. Terrific. Other examples of how we can help someone, help something before it gets so bad.
I think it's also thinking about just noticing, paying attention, and being aware to the people around you.
Okay, being aware of the people around you, meaning, can you say a little bit more about that, Jennifer?
Yeah, for sure. So, you want to, if you're paying attention to the people around you and their behavior and your relationship with them, then you're catching things before things, perhaps spiral to a bad place.
Right, trying to catch it before it's bad, and Sam added to that, look for early signs that someone is suffering from abuse, right? Substance abuse from a partner, etc. And I think that what you're saying, Sam, supports what Jen is saying, right? When you see the problem, when it's smaller, that's when you step in. I think the same could be true with health problems, right? If you, whatever it is, if you find a lump somewhere in your body, or you're having stomach pain, or your teeth you've got a toothache, and any of those types of things, if you get to a doctor sooner rather than later and start trying to treat it, it's gonna be much better than if you get much further along. And our system doesn't always do that so well, right? I've heard so many stories about someone who can't get help for a certain illness, and then they end up in the hospital from it because it got so bad. But if the world had been set up in a way they could have gotten the medication they needed first, they never would have been in the hospital. And the hospital stay is way more expensive than the medication would have been to get. Molly Beth says, pay attention to what you see and hear and reach out early on to help before problems escalates. Excellent.
When we can't pay the bills. Having trouble paying the bills.
Somebody's having trouble paying the bills, help them. Don't wait till they get evicted,
Yeah.
right? Find these systems that will help earlier on.
Mhm.
One of the most beautiful organizations that Milwaukee has is the Milwaukee Jewish Free Loan Association. And it's set up for that, right? And JFS also has help for this as well through J-Help, but somebody's struggling a little bit, having a little trouble, they can go and get help before it becomes a crisis, right?
But we can pay attention to it.
And we can pay attention to it.
Showing the way, if you can't run the most else.
It's actually an amazing thing with social media, the GoFundMe pages. I mean, sometimes
Yeah.
they're not so honest or whatever, but sometimes they really are a way that somebody can get help when they need it.
Mhm.
Roger, did you want to add something?
No, I just finally got my video to work, so
We're glad it's working.
I'm sorry.
No sorry. Okay, so we're on page 3 now. Haley, do you want to read us? Did you read? You just read. Jen, would you like to read us text number 5?
Sorry, unmuting. You said 5?
Yeah.
See the work of God, for who can mend what God has warped. See the work of God, for who can mend what he has warped. When God created Adam, the first person, God took him and showed him all the trees in the Garden of Eden. And God said to him, see my creations, how beautiful and exemplary they are. Everything I created for you. Make certain that you do not ruin and destroy my world. As if you destroy it, there will be no one to mend it after you. Moreover, you will cause death to that righteous one.
Okay. So this kind of goes back to what we were talking about a little in the beginning, that where Roger was mentioning, the idea that we're partners in creation. God made the world, God showed Adam the Garden of Eden and said, you need to take care of it, because if you break it, who's going to fix it? Right? Nobody's coming to help. This is your responsibility. So it doesn't use the words Tikkun Olam to repair the world, but it's actually going even before repairing the world. You've got to protect the world before it gets damaged. You need to watch out for for nature, for animals, for people, for everything around you, and pay attention to it to take care of it before it gets broken. Certainly once it's broken, then you try and repair it, but see if you can avoid the breakingness. I don't know if that's something.
It is now.
It is now. I made it. Thoughts, questions, comments about that text? Molly Beth, you want to read us number 6?
Learn to do good, devote yourself to justice and the wronged, uphold the rights of the orphan, defend the cause of the widow.
So this got a whole list, right? A whole list of things we can do to repair the world. First, to just do good. That goes back to what you're saying, right? To be nice, right? Just do good. And what does that mean? It means to be devoted to justice. That's the activism we talked about. to aid the wronged. If you see something that's wrong, you don't stand by and not do anything. Uphold the rights of the orphan and defend the cause of the widow. So I just want to mention, because I'm thinking about it right now, our speaker that the community is bringing in for Yom HaZikaron is going to be talking about the Yom Kippur War, because it's 50 years since the Yom Kippur War in Israel in 1973. And one of the themes that we're going to bring out through Yom HaZikaron is talking about the orphans of the Yom Kippur War. Because the Yom Kippur War was the first war in Israel where there were lots and lots of orphans. Before that, the wars were mostly very young people who were fighting, and so they didn't leave children behind. But in the Yom Kippur War, it was older people. It was people who were on reserves were called up to fight, and a lot of orphans were left behind. So it's going to be a theme we're going to be visiting this year as a community. All right.
And certainly, widows and orphans are not only, we could say, broken, but they are avoided. We turn our eyes from them because we don't want to ever be them.
For sure.
And so
For
I
sure.
think, again, Tikkun Olam is founded upon both its empathy and it's the realization that we are all together. That in a way, we're various forms of broken, going back to Tzippi's point.
There are some people that I think almost become invisible to us, right? We turn away from it, whether it's orphans or whether it's somebody living on the street. It's a way of turning away. My mom used to talk to me about what it was like for her when my dad was in Vietnam. She was older than most of the people who had a spouse in Vietnam, because my dad had become a doctor before he went. And she moved back to Milwaukee with 2 young kids, and she had family here, and she knew people growing up here, and she was alone almost all the time. Because when people were with her, they felt guilty. They felt guilty that her husband was off at war and their husbands were at home. Or, you know, the women didn't trust her around their husbands because maybe she'd be going after their husbands. I don't know, craziness. But people just kind of turned away and became invisible. Molly Beth added, while thinking of this text, I think of what we say as we teach our youngest children and talking about being a mensch, being a good person. Absolutely. Right. And we know that with kids, the best thing we can do is to call a kid out when they do something good, point it out, label it, praise them for it. Absolutely. Thank you. All right. Text number 7 comes from a section of the Talmud, a section called Yoma. Abe, you want to read this one?
7.
Yep.
Why was the first temple destroyed? Because of 3 evils in it: idolatry, sexual immorality, and bloodshed. But why was the second temple destroyed? Seeing that during the time it stood, people occupied themselves with Torah, with the servants of precepts, and with the practice of charity. Because during the time it stood, hatred without rightful cause prevailed. This is to teach you that hatred without rightful cause is deemed as grave as the 3 sins of idolatry, sexual immorality, and bloodshed together.
Okay. So the first temple was destroyed because of idol worship, because of sexual immorality, because of murder. And the second temple was destroyed because of baseless hatred, sinachina. So it's saying that baseless hatred is as bad as idol worship, murder, and sexual immorality all put together. So it's telling you how very, very serious it is to have baseless hatred. You know, what is baseless hatred? It's hating somebody for no reason. Somebody you don't know, somebody who's a stranger. You don't like the way they look, you don't like the way they sound, you don't like their political beliefs, whatever it is, this hatred of somebody who's different, and not knowing them. What is that? Why did I pull this text in? What does that have to do with repairing the world?
Because of hatred. Be kind.
Be kind, right?
So
So
to hate someone,
so-
it's really not a good reason, and even then.
So we can't begin to repair the world until we deal with that kind of hatred.
I'm watching the TV show Farida, a little bit late after everyone. And the whole time I'm looking at it, I'm saying to my husband, look where hatred is going to get you. Look what happens when you live without hate inside of you. And it's just destruction.
Absolutely.
Just remind me of that.
Destruction of hate. And we can't be repairing the world if we're continuing to break it apart. All right, the next one is another text from the Talmud from Gittin. Sorry, do you want to read this one?
The Mishnah teaches, one does not protest against poor non-Jews who come to take gleanings, forgotten sheaves, and the produce in the corner of the field, which is given to the poor, although they are meant exclusively for the Jewish poor on account of the ways of peace. Similarly, the sages taught, one sustains poor non-Jews along with poor Jews, and one visits sick non-Jews along with sick Jews, and one buries dead non-Jews along with dead Jews.
In today's world, this may seem very obvious, but I did want to point it out that even in the days of the Talmud, the rabbis recognized that this sense of Tikkun Olam, of repairing the world, of being kind, was not just within the Jewish community. It wasn't just about helping other Jews. It was about helping everybody who needs help, right? This is a very universal idea. It wasn't just within the Jewish community. As I said, the idea of helping others within Jewish law does focus on starting with yourself, right? Starting with your family, starting with your community. And so there is a sense of helping other people in the Jewish community, but clearly it's not enough, right? And you need to look outside and be treating everybody in a way that we help others and support everyone. And I do think that in the modern understanding of Tikkun Olam, that's very often what you see. It's definitely not just about helping within the Jewish community, it's also the broader community as well. So like I said, that might not seem surprising, but I think it was unusual in those days, right? People were very focused on their own community. So have anybody have any thoughts about that? I didn't know if it would be controversial to even put it out. Okay, keep going. All right, we got another one from the Talmud. This one comes from the tractate Sukkah. Haley, you want to read this one?
Our sages taught Chasadim, acts of loving kindness is greater than tzedakah in 3 ways. Acts of tzedakah involve only one's money. Gemilut chasadim can involve both money or one's personal service. Tzedakah can be given only to the poor. Gemilut chasadim can be done both for the rich and for the poor. Tzedakah can be given only to the living. Gemilut chasadim can be done both for the living and the dead.
So I thought we could talk a little bit about the difference between tzedakah, which is often translated as charity, but literally means righteousness, between gemilut chasadim, which is literally acts of kindness, and tikkun olam, repairing the world. Because I honestly think a lot of them are used interchangeably, right? You know, when somebody talks about giving tzedakah, they often are not meaning just their money, right? They're also talking about what they're doing to volunteer and to help or whatever. It's not a little definition of the word, but I think it's very overlapping. These deeds of kindness, giving tzedakah, giving money could be a deed of kindness, right? But it's not the only kind of deeds of kindness. And I think it's interesting, this is pointing out that you could do it for the poor, but also for somebody who's not poor, right? It might be inviting somebody to your home for a meal, not because they're hungry, but because they're lonely, right? And the idea here that deeds of kindness can be done not only for the living, but for the dead, that has to do with how you treat someone after they've died, right? The process of burial and people coming together and making sure that there are people around to pay for the burial, that they get a respectful burial, that there are people there for the funeral and supporting the family, et cetera. So it's something you can do even after somebody's dead. But how do you see the differences between tzedakah, charity, acts of kindness, and repairing the world? Do you see differences between them? Is it all just semantics and it's basically, they're all just about helping? Right, let's ask it this way. If you were only able to do one, for some reason, for the rest of your life, you could only do one. You could only do either acts of kindness or give financial support, or try and do things to find these sparks and repair the world, which would be your priority? Hard question. Or maybe better than that, which one do you gravitate to? Right, they say that every person is like born with a commandment, a mitzvah that they like gravitate to, right? Some people really like to have guests. Some people really like to help the poor. Some people like to raise money for charity. Some people love a certain holiday. They love making a Seder for Passover, or they love building a sukkah for Sukkot. Like, is there one of these that you feel like you connect to more than the others? So like raising money for charity, or acts of kindness, or trying to repair the world with activism, making the world a better place. Does one of these speak to you more than the other?
I think to me, Gemilut Chasadim, acts of loving kindness speaks to me. I'm thinking about tzedakah, and there's been times in my life that I felt judged for the amount of money that I've donated, but for doing an act of kindness, there's less judgment there. About,
Okay.
you know, pushing up my sleeves and helping somebody or something.
So the giving of kindness, because you can do it at all times of your life and you feel not judged. Molly Beth says the same, right? So not everybody can always help financially, but you still be able to help in another way.
I think the acts.
May I just ask a question?
Yes,
Are you drawing distinctions between giving money, giving energy, and giving time?
I think that can be part of it, right? Like it literally, when we talk about tzedakah, it's talking about money, right? It's talking about the money that we can give to do good deeds, although I think it's often broadened to mean more than that. But this is pointing out the other differences between these acts of kindness, right? They can be done for the poor or the rich. They can be done for the living or the dead. They can involve money or personal service. So it's a broader category, I think, than tzedakah. Right? It's not just one or the other. So this is sort of an artificial distinction, but I'm trying to help you think about what you think is important. Haley, you said deeds of kindness. Why is that?
I was just gonna say they're kind of contagious. Like you do something kind for someone, they do something kind for someone else, it kind of branches out.
It's the idea of paying it forward, right? You know, the minute you do something kind, it leads to more and more kindness. I think that that's true. Absolutely. Anyone want to take a different take on it? Everyone to say that either Tikkun Olam, repairing the world, activism, or raising money would be a something you're more tied to? Not a right or wrong answer. Oh, and Shelley said she gravitates toward activism and acts of kindness. Terrific. And for sure, they're all related to each other, right? Yeah. Mark, did you want to say something? Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Say you're working on something big like the war in Ukraine, and you support the United States, and your friend who you're very close to supports Putin, and can that kind of a opposition interfere with your work, and that you have to separate yourself from your friend because it's kind of mutually self-destructive. He's on one side, you're on the other side, and is there any kind of problem that can come up when you're doing your work of Tikkun Olam and it's conflicting with your friends or family or something? Can you get kind of a negative feedback?
So I would be happy to hear anybody else's opinion on this. I have some thoughts, but I don't want to, I want to take over right away. What do you guys think to Mark's question? If you're doing one kind of repair of the world and somebody you care about is doing an opposite type of repair of the world, is that something that can disrupt your relationship?
Shouldn't.
Why shouldn't it? Right?
So if we believe in acts of kindness, we should accept everyone the way they are.
So it has to do with accepting people for who they are and what they're trying to do.
Even.
Well, personally, I felt I put it up to my friend and I said, look, it's our friendship, or you have to give up your ideas of it's unpatriotic. We're here in America and you're supporting the enemy. And I said, I can't be with you as a friend if you're supporting the enemy. You're the enemy. And therefore I separated myself from, well, he did, we both did, I guess. And I'll tell you, things are a lot better. I mean, I'm living a happier life since I've done that. And so I would say that the effect of separating myself has been positive for me.
For sure, as we were talking about earlier, the idea of taking care of yourself is important, right? So you need to take care of your own mental health and be able to function. If we wanted to look at a Jewish textual example, I think what I would bring to you is the example of two rabbis, Hillel and Shammai, who were rabbis in the Talmud. They disagreed with each other about pretty much everything. Every time there was a law that came up, they were on opposite sides of the argument. There was one example when they compromised, if you guys know, but almost always the ruling went with Hillel. The law ended up falling with Hillel. The one time they compromised is they disagreed about if you should hang a mezuzah straight up and down like this, or if you should hang it side to side, and they end up compromising. That's why the mezuzah is hung on a side. But almost always Hillel won it. What I can tell you about is that no matter how heated the arguments got between Hillel and Shammai, and they're recorded in the Talmud, they got pretty intense, they were friends. They were good friends and they had respect for each other and they didn't let their disagreements keep them from being friends. It seems to me in our world today it's getting more and more rare, right? And you don't have to look any further than Washington, DC to know that that's what's happening, but look at your Facebook feed, right? Or any other social media. You keep hearing over and over and over again, it's an echo chamber of what you think, right? And being able to have a civil discourse and disagree with someone, but recognize that we're each coming from good places is harder to do. I don't think that goes for anything, right? I'm also been watching the news about what happened at the shooting after the Bucks game and people not wanting to come forward about who was doing the shooting, right? So there are things, there are times when you have to recognize what's right and what's wrong. And Mark, I don't know what the answer is in terms of what's happening in, Russia. I'm not gonna get real political here. What I thought you were gonna get at when you first said what's happening in Ukraine was if we look at the issue of acts of kindness and giving tzedakah, there's a place where tzedakah probably is more important. Because most of us cannot get up and go to Ukraine to help. And even if we have the time and the finances to go and help, if we don't speak Ukrainian or Russian, we wouldn't be so helpful, right? In the beginning of the war, a lot of people were going over there, we're not helping, and we're making things, a lot of people in the Jewish community were going over to look and see what was happening. And it was taking resources away from what was supposed to be helping the people to tour these, big philanthropists who were going there, right? So sometimes the wanting to do kindness is not helpful, right? Or if you want to help people who are very poor, living very far away, sending money is going to be more helpful than packing up packages of tuna and sending it and spending all that money in postage, right? Like there are times where the money is important. All right, thank you all for the great ideas. Let's look at text number 10. I'm gonna put it in the text again because I feel like in the chat again, so I feel like most people came in later. Roger, do you want to read us number 10?
I'm really sorry, I'm not able to.
You don't have the text, that's right, I'm sorry. Sam, Sam didn't have volume. I keep trying to figure out. Molly Beth, you want to read us number 10? All right, Abe, you want to read us number 10?
Yeah. Now each person must say, the entire world was created only for my sake. Consequently, because the world was created for my sake, I must constantly look into and consider ways of making the world better, to provide what is missing in the world and pray on its behalf.
Okay. So if we see the whole world as being created for me, then I really have a responsibility to take care of the world. I can't say, well, let somebody else do it, right? I don't want to have to recycle. Let Korean recycle. She can do it for me, right? I can't say that because the world was created for me. And I actually hear this a lot about environmental stuff. Like what good is it gonna do if I turn off the light switch, or I recycle, or I, use a little bit less water? The real problem with greenhouse gases is, and then they talk about big companies or other countries or whatever, my little part's not gonna do anything, right? I've heard people say it about voting. My vote doesn't matter, right? It's just one little vote, why bother? But if the world was created for me, then I have my responsibility to do everything I can, right? And not just say, oh, somebody else.
It also make you feel better.
It also would make, yeah. Well, it can make you feel better or despondent. Like you can feel like I'm doing all this stuff and the environment's not getting better, but you can't use that as an excuse not to do.
If it does make you feel better, then it will shine.
It'll be an example and make other people. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's where your previous question really fits in. There are different ways to repair based on your resources, your personality, your level of commitment. But I think in all cases, we are not free to avoid.
This is another quote from the Ethics of the Father, paragraph O, that says that we don't have to finish the task, but we're also not free to desist from it. Just because we can't finish doesn't mean we don't work on it, we don't start. All right, we've got a couple more. Jen, you want to read number 11?
Yep. One who comes and says, feed me. We don't investigate to see if they are deceiving. Rather, we feed them immediately. If they were naked and came and said, clothe me, we investigate to see if they are deceiving.
I gotta tell you, I'm reading this and I'm really confused by it. Because I don't know how if they were naked, we would think that they were deceiving them. Let's just start with the first half of it, because I really need to look up the second half. It's not making sense to me. But the idea is that if somebody comes to you and says they're in need, you're not supposed to try and investigate to see whether they are. Just looking at the one more post in the chat. When we assume that the world belongs to others, we find it easy to lose a sense of responsibility. We take that perspective of ownership, then we feel responsibility to care for the planet. Yeah, absolutely. Lizzie, Judy, and Devin, that's 100% spot on.
I wonder if you can't check if someone's hungry because it's something inside, but if he comes naked, you can check.
Then you see that they're actually
If
naked.
there's clothes on, somewhere or.
That makes sense, right? So if it's something you can see and you perceive it right away, then you can look into it, but it's something you can't see. And that's true in our, right? There are people who come and say they need help. And I'm just thinking about disabilities, right? Some disabilities are very visible, right? If you can see somebody is in a wheelchair, right? You can see that they're blind. But if somebody has, emotional issues going on, or if they have a disability that's hidden, they're dyslexic. You can't see that by looking at them, right? So there are hidden disabilities. There are times when people are in need and we think that they're fine and we don't see the hidden need there. And so we shouldn't doubt somebody. When somebody comes and says they need help, we should help them. It's a hard one to follow in the matter because there are people who take advantage of these things, right? And really try and beat the system. So I think it's hard not to become jaded, but this is telling us that we're not supposed to doubt. All right, we've got one last one. I'm going to read it for us. This is from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, who passed away a few years ago, who was once the chief rabbi of England. So he said, David Hume noted that our sense of empathy diminishes as we move outward from the members of our family to our neighbors, our society, and the world. Traditionally, we see our sense of involvement with the fate of others has been inverse proportion to the distance separating them, us and them. What has changed is that television and the internet have effectively abolished distance. They have brought images of suffering in far-off lands into our immediate experience. Our sense of compassion for the victims of poverty, war, and famine runs ahead of our capacity to act. Our moral sense is simultaneously activated and frustrated. We feel that something should be done, but what, how, and by whom? I think it's an interesting thought, right? It's the trouble that's happening far away seems much more real now to us when we can see it in real time. But sometimes we have such a desire to help the trouble we see 1,000 miles away that we don't see what's happening in our backyard. Do you guys think that's true? What do you think people pay more attention to? The trouble that's right in front of us in our own community, or the trouble that's far away that we're seeing in the news?
I think unfortunately, it is still what Hume said. It is our family, and it is what we truly define as our community. And I think we know that within there are parts of Milwaukee that are a million miles away from us, and there are parts of the world that are a million miles away from us. So I think that's why we need to keep studying and break down those barriers. And I think that's where Jewish wisdom offers us a source of hope.
So it's very interesting because Roger, I don't think you heard Haley, but she spoke at the exact same time as you, and she said the place is far away, what the media is saying showing to us, and you said the stuff that's right in front of us. And maybe it's both, right? Maybe it's both of those things. But for Roger, I also like your point that there are places in Milwaukee that may seem thousands of miles away from us because we don't see the suffering. We don't drive to that area and we don't see what's going on.
That's not always being shown on the news, whereas some of these bigger issues across the world might be.
So stuff is like, we're manipulated into what we see. And again, if you think back to social media and whatever, what you're seeing depends on who you're friends with on Facebook and what you're liking on Facebook, and then they show you more of the same. So it's really interesting how that all plays out. I want to say a big thank you. We've got some people from out of town who joined us today, and I really am thrilled that you are all here. Sam says sometimes easier to see trouble elsewhere and think that something should be done, but believe it's not something you need to get involved with, for sure. I also think sometimes it's easier to see the trouble far away because it seems less personal and threatening. Like I don't have to worry, you know, you see something bad that happens on the news and you think, okay, but that's not my neighborhood. But that's not people I know. Like it somehow makes us feel safe. So I want to say is I'm so thrilled that we had some people from out of town join us. I'm also happy we had people in the room and are gonna be teachers who are in the classrooms with cameras off. I'm glad all of you came, all of our teachers, everybody. I just want to tell you about a couple of upcoming classes. We have a class on Sunday for teachers at 12:15 at Sinai, where we're going to be talking about include LGBTQ inclusion in the classroom, what that would look like. We have a couple of guest speakers. I think it's going to be a really great discussion, so I encourage all of you to come. And then there's just a whole list of classes coming up. We've got one with Holocaust Education Resource Center coming. And lots of good stuff on the pipe. We got a great book club for Jewish Disability Awareness Month in February. So I encourage you to keep coming to classes. Oh, and in February, our midwinter learning is going to be with Cantor Rebecca Robbins, who used to be at Congregation Sinai. Going to talk about how to use responsive classroom, specifically in Sunday school classrooms, but also in preschool classrooms. So I think it should be good. So I wish everyone a wonderful day and thank you for coming, and I'll see you at one of our next classes. Have a great day.